Welcome to the 30-day novel NaNoWriMo series. Today is day 17. My name is Lynn Johnston and I blog at writesmarternotharder.com. As always, we want to talk about how you're going to move your story forward today. Now that your characters have exited the midpoint of the story, they've had their reactions to whatever happened at the midpoint, and now they're heading toward the second pinch point of the story. And again, a pinch point is a point in your story where your protagonist and your protagonist allies are encountering the influence of or the after effects of the antagonist forces. It could be a direct encounter. It could be that they actually run right into an ambush that the antagonist has planned for them. It could be something indirect, like, for example, they're going somewhere that they're expecting to get resupplied and they find out that the antagonist has poisoned the well, so they're not going to be able to get the water they thought they needed, that they thought was there. So it can be direct or indirect, but somehow your protagonist needs to be on a collision course with the antagonist forces, and they need to make that collision when you get to the second pinch point. We're not at the second pinch point, but we're heading toward it right now, so you're setting that encounter up. So for your protagonist, you can ask yourself, what action does the protagonist deliberately take that forces him or her to cross paths with the antagonist? Does the protagonist know how the antagonist forces are going to respond when they cross paths, or is there something that the protagonist doesn't know about the situation that he or she is heading into? Again, is it going to be an ambush? Is it a deliberate confrontation? Is it a confrontation that they know the protagonist, they know the protagonist knows that the antagonist is there, but they're hoping to avoid him, or they're hoping to sneak by him, or they're hoping to hit them quickly and then escape before the antagonist forces knows what hit them. So whatever kind of a collision your protagonist is heading into, you want to think about how you're going to set that up. And you also, again, want to make sure it's a deliberate choice, that it's not just the universe pushing the protagonist into that situation. It's the antagonist taking charge and making a decision based on what's happening. The protagonist will take what the antagonist is doing into account and will take what is happening in the universe into account, but you still want the protagonist to be making a deliberate decision, because you want your protagonist not to be a victim. You want your protagonist to be a hero. So asking yourself about your other characters in the story, are they aware that they're headed for a collision with the antagonist forces? Do the protagonist allies know? Does the antagonist know? Do the antagonist forces know? Does anybody try and warn the protagonist or the antagonist that this collision is coming? Maybe the protagonist allies are like, hey, you know what, that's dangerous because, or maybe it's actually the antagonist forces. Maybe your protagonist is approaching the antagonist fortress, and the antagonist forces are basically saying, hey, you don't have permission to be here, buzz off. So again, who knows what is going to be totally dependent on what kind of story you're writing, but you want to be sure you know who does know and who warns who, because you don't want later to have a situation where the reader's like, hey, it seems like in this one scene the protagonist's sidekick knew this was coming, but he never told the protagonist. That doesn't make sense. And then you've set the protagonist ally up to either be dumb or to betray the protagonist. And either way, you only want to do that intentionally. So looking at the conflict in your story, you can ask yourself, what positive goal does the protagonist pursue that is worth the risk of entering enemy territory? Now, it is possible your protagonist doesn't know yet that they're entering enemy territory. They still need to be pursuing a positive goal, something that is worth the risk of possibly entering enemy territory. You want to ask yourself how the protagonist is planning to handle the encounter with the enemy if they know about it. If they don't know that the enemy is there, you might want to ask yourself, what obstacles does the protagonist anticipate? Do they think they're really in friendly territory? Are they in neutral territory but constantly looking over their shoulders in case the antagonist is about to catch up to them? You can also ask yourself, how does the antagonist know that the protagonist is coming? If he does, maybe your antagonist doesn't know and it's going to be a surprise. Maybe the protagonist is really ambushing the antagonist, or maybe this is going to be blindsiding both the protagonist and the antagonist. Neither of them knew that the other was in the area, so they're both being taken off balance by this. So however you want to set it up, there's conflict there regardless of who knows what. So you just want to think about where that conflict is. And of course, if people on either side know that the conflict is coming, that's a potential source of interpersonal conflict, because if the protagonist's allies see a threat that the protagonist doesn't, that's a chance for them to argue about which way they should really go, to sabotage the mission, and do all the things that people do when they don't agree with somebody that they have agreed to, that they basically link their fate with, and then that other person starts doing things they don't agree with. So looking at your setting, does anything in the setting either hide or make more obvious the increase in the antagonist's power and influence? And again, we're moving towards the climax of the story. At this point of the story, your antagonist should be growing in power and influence in some way. It doesn't have to be a big thing. It can be subtle. But basically, the scale is starting to tip. After the midpoint, it tips away from the protagonist to the antagonist a little bit in terms of the balance of power. So your antagonist is probably gaining a toehold somewhere, or he's figuring out how he can use the protagonist's intrusion into his territory against the protagonist. How you can take advantage of something that the protagonist has done that the protagonist doesn't realize is a liability. You also might want to ask yourself if there's a setting element that the protagonist might want to take away from the antagonist, or vice versa. If they are competing for an object, if they are both trying to get the best position on a battlefield, somebody's going to end up with a higher ground and somebody's going to end up losing the higher ground. So look at your setting, how your setting is going to play into the second pinch point that's coming up, and basically whatever you need to do to set that up, you want to think about that now. As always, you want to look at your story promise. We're about to head into the second pinch point, so you want to think about what are you going to promise your reader about this next encounter between protagonist and antagonist. And as always, it can be very subtle. It can be foreshadowing. It could be something that the reader doesn't even recognize is foreshadowing, but that in retrospect they look back and say, oh yeah, that encounter had to go that way, and we knew that by the way that the protagonist was acting right before the encounter. Getting started, as always, do your pre-writing ritual, do your warm-up exercise, and I just want to reiterate that positive goals are more compelling than negative goals. Active characters, in other words, heroes, run toward things. Passive characters, or victims, run away from things. So even if your character, your protagonist, is being pursued by something, and he really does have to get away from whatever's pursuing him, have him form a positive goal that helps him get away. If the goal is just like, oh my gosh, if I can just reach this next river, I know that fording the river will cause the dogs on my tail to lose my scent. Or if I can just get to this one place where my friend is hiding out, my friend will help me fight this bear off. Or if I can just hold really still and look like a tree and hope that the illusion is not too thin for the wizard to see through, the wizard will walk by and leave me alone. Whatever it is that your character is trying to get away from, give them something to run toward, give them a goal, because that makes them active instead of passive. And readers really bond more strongly with active characters, or characters who are trying to take control of their fate, than passive ones. And again, maybe your protagonist doesn't succeed in taking control of the situation. Maybe your protagonist fails at achieving that positive goal, and that's fine. But the fact that they're attempting to do it makes the reader respect them more. And it also demonstrates that they're worthy to achieve the goal that they're going to be achieving at the climax of the story. Or if they're not going to achieve it and it's a tragedy, it makes it more poignant when they don't, because they've already proven that they deserve to. After you write, always celebrate your progress. Always prepare for the next day. Anything you can do to make tomorrow easier. And if you haven't seen them already, I've got some workshops on my blog, writesmarternotharder.com, that you can download. It's called the After You Write worksheet, and basically it has a series of questions on it that you can answer after you write that help you prepare for the next day. Basically, it's questions like, how many words did you write? What distractions did you encounter and how could you eliminate them? What negative thoughts did you have and how can you turn those negative thoughts around? What things went well and how could you do more of that tomorrow? Basically, it's diagnostic questions for your creative process that help you figure out what is working well for you and help you notice that, to help you notice patterns. If you answer the questions every day for a couple of weeks, you will start to notice patterns in terms of what distractions come up and what negative thoughts sabotage you, and what things you're doing that are effective. So I would recommend, if you are having difficulty staying the course and you're having difficulty establishing a writing habit, go and download that worksheet. It's in the downloads tab at writesmarternotharder.com, and answer those questions every day after you finish your writing session, and use them as a way to fine-tune your creative process, to see what's really keeping you from writing and what's really making it easier for you to write. And then every day when you prepare for the next day, take those patterns into account, set up your workspace, set up your environment, choose your time in such a way that the things that interfere with your writing are minimized and the things that are effective in helping you write are maximized. Thanks for stopping by today. Happy writing, and I'll see you tomorrow.